Welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. Today in this eclipse special, I'm going to jointly review the lunar eclipse across the 17th or 18th of September in the sign of Pisces and the solar eclipse in the sign of Libra across the 2nd and the 3rd of October. They're from different series, but the energy from them will provide a backdrop for the next 6 months. They're incredibly potent. The first, the lunar eclipse, is a partial lunar eclipse, but it ushers in a new eclipse series between the signs of Pisces and Virgo. This is a precursor for the inversion of the nodal axis, the true nodes, on the 11th of January 2025, when the North Node moves to Pisces, the point of destiny, and the south to Virgo. That event is probably the most influential of the whole of next year. But the solar eclipse in Libra provides the penultimate influence between the signs of Libra and of Aries. And if we can knit these two different series energies together and integrate them into our lives in the latter part of this year and the first part of 2025, it will be immensely to our advantage. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to briefly outline how I'm going to structure the video. I will share with you the exact timings across the major cities of the world for both the lunar and the solar eclipse. But also on the screen, I'll share the event chart for the lunar eclipse to begin with. The event chart from a solar perspective helps us to all collectively relate to it. And that, of course, will put the moon in house 12, very close to the ruler of the sign of Pisces, the mesmeric shifting energies of Neptune. But Uranus, the planet of surprises, is also in the mix. But in the event chart from a natal perspective, that pictures the eclipse in house 8, which is a very mysterious area, very much to do with big transitions and can be deeply psychological. Please stay with me for more. I'm then going to repeat the same exercise for the solar eclipse in the sign of Libra, but very close to the quick wits of Mercury. I'm also going to share the natal chart for that event too, and that information will just help us to have a lot more understanding of how this will impact on us. But please stay with me. I'll then go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces, which you can reflect to in terms of your ascendant, sun or the moon. If you're new to my channel, it's great to have your company. If you'd like to get your free daily written horoscope fired to your device each morning, please click on the sub button below. Please take advantage of your year 2025 personal horoscope offer. You can order it now, get the rest of 24 free, and also get your life roadmap report, which will help you to understand the patterns that are played out in your life so far and how to work with them more effectively. There's also 30% off. Please see the link below for more. And if you'd like a one-to-one with me, I am a consulting astrologer. Please see the link below to look at my testimonials and how other people have found working with me. So the lunar eclipse occurs across the 17th or the 18th of September. On the screen now, I'm showing exactly the timings for all the major cities of the world. I'm also sharing the solar eclipse timings too. The lunar eclipse ushers in, as I mentioned, the first of a new eclipse series, but let's think about the archetypes of the sign of Pisces. Pisces is the sign of culmination. It's the 12th zodiac sign. It's watery, it's mutable, so therefore it flexes, but also it's a sign that has two rulers, two co-regents, Neptune, which is very close to the moon on this event, but also Jupiter. Jupiter is the traditional ruler of the sign of Pisces. Jupiter's reputation is very much about positivity, growth, optimism and good fortune. It's the greater benefit, but it's also very intrinsically linked to faith. And that's where its influence and beliefs, its influence is so strongly linked to the sign of Pisces. So on the screen now, I'm showing the event chart from a solar perspective. And you can see the moon is at 25 degrees and 47 minutes in the 12th house, very, very close to the shimmering, mesmeric, atmospheric energies of Neptune. This suggests that when it comes to reflection, because of Neptune being about to move into Aries on the 30th of March 2025 for just under 8 months, for the first time in 163 years, we need to think back to what Neptune has represented since it's been travelling through Pisces, which began in 2012. Now, of course, it will depend on your unique natal chart, but also your zodiac sign. But Neptune in Pisces, in a general sense, has seen a lot of escapism. It's also seen the expansion of lots of different types of approaches, particularly to healing and spirituality, which can be a truly positive thing. But that escapism has also seen a burgeoning amount of issues, particularly around addiction. Now, whatever type of escapism we might choose to do occasionally, for some people it can be something that they're much more locked into, and that can create a lot of suffering. But of course, Neptune can also be very much to do with empathy, compassion, and our senses. So this is a very sensory lunar eclipse. But on the other side of the heavens is the deeply practical position of the sun, which is wanting to work with the more tangible realm. So they're competing with one another. So over the next 6 months, how do we work this out? Well, the clue could be, in some ways, Uranus. Uranus may have been a disruptor through its journey in the sign of Taurus, 4 times since March 2019. But in this event, Uranus is telling us that if we can be open-minded in our approach, it will be to our advantage. Because I feel since Saturn moved into Pisces in March 2023, some of the gaseous, escapist vibes of Neptune have been challenged by the cool reality of Saturn. Saturn, of course, will itself move into Aries for 3 months and 8 days this coming year, from the 25th of May, but they're both going to move into Aries in 2026 and won't be coming back to Pisces anytime soon, particularly not Neptune. It's going to be another 164 years. So whatever we've been collectively going through in terms of trying to understand the end of that entire cycle, whether it has been through compassion, healing, caring, sensitivity in all its positive guises, or through the escapism or the pollution of our seas, which of course Neptune is an aquatic influence. It is the ruler of the sea, and we see an enormous amount of plastics and poisons. Neptune can be what we can't see, but can still affect us negatively, have piled into the sea. So in a way, the position of the sun is asking us to reform. And the sun in Virgo can be very much to do with refinement, with purity. And if we can rinse things out, find new structures that actually find a way to work with that more spiritual healing and psychological energy of the 12th house and Pisces, but in a way that's meaningful. And Uranus is essentially saying that could come from challenging some of our beliefs, because the sign of Taurus very much about what we hold dear, and unfortunately what's become much more the main currency has been things like wealth, property, status, and sometimes at the expense of the planet. So Uranus gives us a chance to think again afresh about how we balance the more spiritual, psychological and more subconscious domains with the more practical and everyday workable parts of our situation. So over the next 6 months, we're going to have to try to embrace our vulnerabilities more, not be so hung up about it, but at the same time be aware that victimhood to a greater extent is not necessarily a good thing. So we need to find that tipping point of virtue. And what Uranus is essentially saying is to revise our values, but also our attitudes to consumption. And consumption, of course, can be to do with some of those escapist poisons that we may all from time to time enjoy, whether it's a nice glass of wine or whether it's something a little more noxious. It's all about the amount. And with Neptune, sometimes we don't know when to limit ourselves because it's boundaryless. And that's where Saturn has been such an asset. So that's how I see it from a solar perspective. What about from a natal perspective? On the screen now, based on Greenwich and Universal Time, so this puts this event on the 18th of September, we have the Moon, but also Neptune in House 8. Now that's really interesting because the 8th house can be about where we make spiritual transitions. It can be also where we dive deep, don our detective's max. But of course the 8th house can also be to do with things like intimacy, but shared resources and finances. The Sun, on the other hand, is in House 2. Very practical. It's about the immediate management of our resources, our values, and our self-worth. But what about Uranus in this chart? It's in House 10. So our connection to the world suggests we're going to need to think about our values, but also our resources in a different way. And one of the ways this may show up for us all collectively is where we share interactions around finance. So we've seen some choppiness in the markets recently. And of course, it all depends on employment numbers and exchange rate mechanisms. But we have seen some equities dropping in values recently and then recovering a bit. But the interest rates that were at an incredibly low level seem to be something of the past. But maybe we've all got to grapple with this new reality that money is not as freely available and as inexpensive as it has been in the past. So property, resources, investments, all of these things could go through a time of uncertainty across the next 6 months because Neptune can create illusions, distortions, and dishonesty if we're really honest. So we could see a lot more come out into the public domain where there has been corruption or misuse of public funds, and those stories can permeate into the open because Uranus is the ruler of the sky, but it is about higher truths, and you can see it's in the 10th house. So there could be sudden exposés. And of course the 8th house can also be about sex, intimacy, and power. And if power has been applied in the wrong kind of way, those stories can also continue to come into the open. But what about the solar eclipse? The solar eclipse in Libra is delicious in a way because it's so close to the position of Mercury. Mercury, of course, rules 2 signs of Gemini, quick communications, but also of Virgo, very much to do with precision. The host, Libra, is about fairness, equilibrium, balance. It's an air sign, so it's about communication. So having Mercury there, using its more Gemini type energies, suggests we can be a bit more detached. But if we use the Virgoan energies, it helps us to also dryly analyze situations. So relationships, we can work forwards on our relationships over the next 6 months and try to be a little bit more detached. And that means taking it a little less personally. If someone sees a situation differently from us, but also we can sharpen up with Mercury in the mix our listening skills, because the sign of Libra is very much about finding the tip point, the harmonious point between what we give and also what we need. Now, it's true that the Sun is technically in its full in the sign of Libra, but over the next 6 months, our desire to find a connection to others certainly can be strengthened by this event. And Mercury here is essentially saying, look, if someone does have a different viewpoint, let them air it. Because if it's ventilated, then we can discuss on working a way forwards together in a more collegiate collective way. So it's about openness, and particularly about trying to improve the sharing and the exchange of information between us. And perhaps also recognizing that even if not every relationship is perfect, there are always going to be things that we do have in common. So that's what that solar eclipse, from a solar perspective, is really asking us to consider. But what about from a natal perspective? So on the screen now, you can see that the Sun, the Moon, and also Mercury are in house 6. So that sharp-edged precision that's very Virgoan, very much about finding the detail in situations. But if we get too caught up in the detail, sometimes that can become or make it more difficult to see the big picture. So we are being asked to retain the perspective and to keep that sense of trying to find that balance. So how do these two eclipses bind together? If we think about the spiritual dimension of the Pisces lunar eclipse, very much to do with the end of the journey, it's possible that our subconscious can be very potent in terms of our relationships. And that could mean that some past energies come up into our minds. And perhaps to do with separations that have occurred many moons ago. We could feel hugely nostalgic for someone from our past. Or even if we don't actually get in touch with them, we can still process through us some outstanding energies that we may be holding on to. But more complex could be that the lunar eclipse influences and interacts with current relationships in a way which creates confusion and uncertainty. So they are going to be competing, make no mistake about it. They're not going to be working in a joined up way. We need to work these energies ourselves, and that's the critical thing. So the logic and the communication of Libra needs to interact with the potential for escapism, distortion, and the more subconscious energies of Pisces. And it is going to be something that will require care and attention to detail. Now, please stay with me as I go through each of the 12 signs from Aries through to Pisces to give you a flavour of what I feel will hold for the next 6 months for from both eclipses' point of view. So Aries, for you, the solar eclipse in your sign earlier in the year was firing you up to stand in your power. But that doesn't mean to say that you can't still connect to someone else in a really meaningful way. And if you do want to bring someone into your world over the next 6 months, this is a glorious opportunity, because the solar eclipse really does give you the chance to interact very skillfully. What's not to like? Well, it's just the lunar eclipse is an echo of the energy that Neptune since 212 and Saturn since 223 have been creating. If you've worked hard at dealing with and releasing old pain from relationships that didn't work out well for you, that makes you more available to seize the mantle of the solar eclipse. If there's still remnants of that energy washing around inside of you and in some ways haunting your desires and opportunities in the here and now, more inner work may be needed to wash away anything that's still residing deep in your psyche. But if you do want to get on the front foot and you're feeling good about yourself, the solar eclipse is absolutely fantastic. But I do feel it's still important to stay in touch with how things feel. And you probably have been feeling very nostalgic at times. Even if it's not for someone who's going to come back into your life, you may have just been reviewing the importance they had on you. And not necessarily just in a romantic sense. You may have been grieving and thinking a lot for past loved ones, or perhaps people who've moved away. It doesn't always have to be about a romance, but relationship opportunities are certainly there for you to seize them with the solar eclipse. But it's all about how available you are in the inner part of your being. So Taurus, the lunar eclipse, your emotional responses is in your 11th house, which is very much to do with your long-term future, your direction of travel, the people you connect to in your friendship group, but also it can be your principles. And if something that you had been deeply invested in over a long period of time needs to shift in terms of your life structure, that's where the solar eclipse comes in. So they can work together, even if in slightly nuanced ways. So the energy of the lunar eclipse is where you're being drawn to, and you're going to have more of it from the 11th of January next year. Your desire to live your future in a way which fits your values is going to become stronger. But sometimes if we don't want to do anything anymore because of those values, it can have a practical dimension and impact. And that's where the solar eclipse comes in. So for example, if you want to change your job role, you want to work in a different way, you want to work with different people, that's a huge amount of shifting. So the key, because Neptune's in the mix, is that you do try to clarify why you have particular motivations. Because if you do things in a whimsical way, Saturn's going to be there. Okay, it is going to move into Aries for 3 months and 8 days in 25, but it is going to be there for the most part through to 26, reminding you that there will be consequences if you don't think through long-term decisions carefully enough. So you can't be too idealistic and too dreamy, essentially, which is what Neptune is going to impact on that lunar eclipse for you. So the clarity that comes from a 6th house solar eclipse, particularly in an air sign like Libra, which helps to weigh up all the options, is what you need to make sure that you're feeding into the process of whatever direction your life is taking. So Gemini, since 2012, Neptune has potentially been giving you an enormous opportunity to connect to people in a very sensory or caring way. If you do work in a healing role, something to do with health, anything to do with the esoteric world, Neptune has probably been a great gift. But since Saturn arrived a couple of years ago, some of the things that you were enjoying might have seemed more onerous. So the lunar eclipse is asking you a question. Is your connection through your professional world giving you the opportunity to showcase your imagination, your flair, and perhaps the more sensory part of your nature? Because if the answer to that question is no, the solar eclipse comes along to really push you to manifest your talent to the maximum degree. But the key to make the most of those talents is to be very clear about what your goals and objectives are. And that's where Neptune can cause some mischief. So for example, if you are or have a role, a professional role that you feel you need to keep doing, perhaps because of the financial part of it and to do with security, but it is pulverizing your passion, these two eclipses are really going to ask some serious questions over the next 6 months and push you in some ways to alter your approach, perhaps letting go of something that gives you that level of security and stability, but bringing in something which is much more invigorating, exciting, because you are a sign that needs spark. And of course Uranus has also been shaking up your subconscious since March 2019. So potentially for some Geminis there may have been huge insights developing, others may have been more reluctantly being prompted and prodded by Uranus to become more conscious of some strands that maybe are more tender to look at, such as anxieties and so forth. So Uranus in the mix of this particular event suggests that you should listen to your deeper inner voice, even if it does push you in some ways to radically change your approach to the type of work or connection you have to the wider world. But if you end up showing people just how talented you are, how much flair you've got, and how much ability over the next 6 months, and also at the same time maintain the level of stability and security you need, that would be a perfect outcome. Now Cancer, you could find yourself in a little bit of a dilemma over the next 6 months, because one part of you may want to really be very escapist, adventurous, independent. Another part of you is reminding you of the importance of your home hub, whether it's the support you get from loved ones, whether it's the physical home you live in. Being more adventurous obviously is very exciting, but with that freedom does come a need for a base. And if you're wanting it all, it could be a little bit of a hard juggle. So I feel for some crabs over the next 6 months, you could think about where you live, particularly if it's somewhere a little too remote and therefore isn't mentally stimulating enough. Or if you're someone who lives in a very busy place but you want to be somewhere more peaceful, that might be something that you're going to act out. If your travel hopes have been in some ways thwarted a little bit by Saturn moving through Pisces over the last couple of years, you may want to punch through that and really expand your horizons or learn new skills. If you learn those new skills and knowledge or operate a business from the comfort of your home, you'll be working the paradigm of this particular joint eclipse pairing in as best way as possible. I've said it a few times, Leo, but I do think there's been a lot of sacrifice for you that goes back a long way. From 2008, Pluto moved into the most practical part of your situation, but also the area that's most to do with sacrifice and supporting others. Neptune from 2012 has created the potential for illusions around close alliances. There may have been someone you've tripped the light fantastic with in terms of a sexual connection, and it may have been absolutely incredible. But there also may have been someone else where you never really seem to know where you stood. Someone very mystical, alluring, but somehow or another unavailable. And I feel that this particular event, the lunar eclipse, is reminding you of the need for clarity about where you're close. But the solar eclipse is going to give you a deep desire to ask the relevant questions, but this time not be fobbed off. Because I feel over the last couple of years, Saturn has brought a firmer dimension to your approach. And of course, Pluto moving into your 7th house, although it's not there at the moment, it will return on the 19th of November. So as you go into next year, really setting out your boundaries is going to be something you're deeply into because of Mars being in your sign at the start of the year opposite Pluto. So you're going to be much more single-minded. So I feel that the lunar eclipse here could remind you of some of the good and some of the magical parts of Neptune's journey since 2012 in Pisces. But the solar eclipse is reminding you that you want to know what the facts are and you want them clear. And if anyone's a bit hazy or evasive, particularly around shared finances, you're just not going to accept it. What comes up for me for you, Virgo, is values. Values is a very old-fashioned, it would seem now, way of thinking about relationships, because we're very much into how things look, appearances, the more superficial dimension. But since 2012, you may have encountered someone who really, really was absolutely glorious to be around. It could have been someone else. You never really knew where you stood with them. Saturn over the last couple of years has made you firmer about what will work for you or not. But whatever relationships you're trying to work on, it's going to be around values that's so important. And so when relationships were forged many years ago, and of course it's still the case in certain cultures now, the connection was thought about much more in terms of, do we have similar values? So think about that over the next 6 months, because for sure this lunar eclipse can make you much more romantically inclined, but the solar eclipse is asking you to be attuned to the values. But when it comes to existing relationships, it's about getting the financial part of the situation working well. And I feel that you are going to assert yourself much more strongly. And for you, the nodal axis moving into your sign in Pisces is a real opportunity to get that sweet spot between what you need and what you're prepared to give, but what someone else needs and is prepared to give to you. So relationships are going to come under the astral microscope, but be guided by values, and if it feels right, and also in terms of just ordinary relationships, make sure that the finances are working in a clear, understandable way for all concerned. So Libra, you're a natural relator. It's a great gift with you. But sometimes the thing that we're very good at has a polar opposite. So what aren't you getting? You might give, but are you getting? If there's been too much giving, particularly with Neptune and over the last couple of years, Saturn being in your 6th house, and especially at work, there's been too much giving and not feeling that you're respected enough, that your boundaries are really respected, and that people are understanding what you need. The solar eclipse is really asking you to shine brightly through the next 6 months, to have more confidence in asserting yourself, to know when to say no. Your natural compassion has been definitely accentuated by Neptune, but I feel that Saturn has been showing the impact of that over the last couple of years, and perhaps you felt weary, a little bit overwhelmed at times. It's all been a bit too much give and not enough get. So be firmer about what you need. That's really the combination of these two eclipses. Scorpio, do you have untapped creative and artistic and spiritual talents that need to come out? The wonderful lunar eclipse for you is in your 5th house, which is really asking you to think about where you can trip the light fantastic. And the solar eclipse, because it's in your 12th house, suggests that there may be some parts of your existence which you're not quite getting in touch with. They may be locked away talents. So there may be some things that you can quarry down deep within yourself, some resources that you can bring out and demonstrate to people just how talented you can be. Now, if you can combine the talent with craft, with the practicality, that's going to be the story of next year. So expressing yourself in a way which captures people's imagination, but then shaping it in a practical delivery. That will come from Saturn and Neptune being in Aries. But the lunar eclipse here is really asking you some questions, but the 12th house solar eclipse suggests that you may have to go into yourself in order to find the resources to help your creative world or even your love life really flourish as you truly want. So Sagittarius, Saturn and Neptune in your 4th house, particularly Saturn over the last couple of years, may have created some or a sense of limitation, or you've had to take home, family and emotional issues much more seriously, which may in some ways have felt like you're have not been able to be quite as outgoing and free as you would ordinarily like. So the solar eclipse suggests a very sociable 6 months is in store for you. However, being in touch with how you feel about things, owning your emotions, is all part of the learning journey that's been going on with Neptune and Saturn support. It is going to continue next year with the North Node, and therefore for another year and a half. But it's all preparing you to relaunch yourself once Saturn and Neptune move back into Aries in 2026, because then the nodal axis is switching to Aquarius, and that really is going to trigger that part of you that loves to be friendly, interactive, move around, explore, exchange information, but there's still root work that's needed, but you can do it in connection to others. And if you have a clear plan about your long-term future, the solar eclipse is going to help you to take a giant step towards your target. So Capricorn, over the last couple of years, you may have found yourself at times feeling a little tongue-tied, which could be uncharacteristic. It may not be, because sometimes Capricorn people can be a little diffident, a little more reserved. But the solar eclipse suggests that if you really want to raise your profile and aim high and really seize a prize, your communicational skills are going to be very important to the process. And because Neptune is applying to this lunar eclipse, if you're not really clear and having Saturn your ruler, certainly through to the 25th of May next year, and from the 1st of September through to the end of the year, it's going to be the case that the prize is going to be there, but you might not quite have the self-belief in your ideas, the 3rd house, or how you're going to connect with people through your for your communications to actually seize it. So Neptune can disperse, but it also can enchant. Make sure that your communication tunes into the emotional side of things, because Saturn may have made you a little bit more inhibited And that may have meant to some people immediately around you, or felt like you were being more judgmental, cooler, not really quite so easy to rub along with. So if you really want to be successful with the solar eclipse, communications, clear communications, and I know that Mercury is with that solar eclipse, but it's around that Neptunian influence that's so important. And Uranus is certainly cheering you on in the mix, pushing you to be a little bit more freer spirited and experimental too. Aquarius, we all like a bit of escapism, don't we? Whether it's into a good book or watching a movie, listening to some fantastic music, traveling to somewhere that's mesmerizing and immersive. However, the reality of Saturn, your traditional ruler, being in Pisces the last couple of years, suggests that there may have been some quite practical things that you've had to deal with in your everyday world, not least finance. Neptune here, since 212, may have made you in some ways very generous, particularly to good causes, because the Jupiterian and Neptunian joint influence of Pisces may have seen you really want to do your best for those that you feel are not finding it so easy. But if your own situation has tightened up, it's made it more difficult to be experimental, adventurous and independent in the way that the 9th house energy of the solar eclipse is pushing you to do over the next 6 months. So if you're thinking about a job, it may be involve travel, it may involve higher education, publishing, it may include some kind of role where you're actually physically moving. It could also be that if you're someone with knowledge that you could teach or train, all of those things can come through that Libran energy. But if you do want to do something, travel somewhere and be more investigative and curious over the next 6 months, there's a great opportunity to do it. But Neptune can obviously cause a little bit of confusion, and Saturn's essentially saying you've got to make sure the foundations of your life are right before you try anything that's a bit too different, to be honest. So Pisces, for you, the lunar eclipse particularly, it's all about relationships. If you're not convinced that you're being respected and valued and heard and seen in the way you really want, you could feel quite at times overwhelmed if you feel that someone's just not tuning in as sensitively to you as you have such a gift to them. But with Saturn in your sign, and it depends on exactly how close it is to important inner planets or personal points, that can also be part of the picture. But the solar eclipse is saying, look, if some things need to transform in your life, particularly business relationships or anything around long-term finance, entrepreneurship, you need to stand up what you want. And Uranus is saying, think outside the box wherever is needed and is possible. But if there is any relationship which isn't working very well in your life, the chances are it will be going over the next 6 months if you choose to make the decision, because Uranus, slowly but surely, is going to make you much more conscious through to the end of its time in Taurus. Going to have 4 months in Gemini next year, but then it's going to be choppy in your home and emotional sector. So if a relationship isn't giving you exactly what you need, the transitional part of the solar eclipse may call out to you. However, if a relationship's going really well, the devotional parts of the 8th house solar eclipse could see you get ever more invested in that tie. So it's a little bit of a one fish going one way and one fish going another. Where have I heard that before? All the best, Pisces. Thank you so much for joining me for this eclipse special. The combination of the lunar eclipse and the solar eclipse, incredibly powerful for the next 6 months. Please do check out your free daily written horoscope by subscribing underneath this video, or please also check out your year 2025 deep dive special by clicking on the link within this video. All the best, take care, and goodbye.